Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be talking about one of the strangest stories that I've ever heard to have come out of the 19th century. So if you like cults, sun worship, coconuts, and nudism, stick around, because today we're going to be discussing August Engelhardt and his coconut cult, the Sonnenorden-Kabakon. But first, I would like to remind you all to please like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you can be notified of new uploads, leave a comment, and share the video. I would also like to give the disclaimer that there's not a whole lot of information available about this cult, so the dates that I give are generally going to be my best educated guess of when things took place based on the research that I've conducted. If I give an exact date, then that is a certain date, but if I say that something happened around such and such a date, or that it happened between the years of so and so and so and so, then I'm guesstimating. August Engelhardt was born in 1875, or maybe 1877. I've seen both dates floating around, in Nuremberg, in the newly formed German Empire. His parents, Charles Otto and Charlotte Wilhelmina Maria Engelhardt, were first cousins. Not much is known about Engelhardt's childhood, but he was probably relatively affluent because his father owned a paint factory. Later in life, Engelhardt claimed that his parents were physically abusive towards him, and I've not been able to verify this claim, but I can also see no reason for him to lie about it. So while I'm not going to say that that is absolutely true, I'm going to say that it is a distinct possibility. Engelhardt's mother died in 1894 when Engelhardt was either 17 or 19, depending on when he was born, and his father followed his mother to the grave shortly thereafter in 1896. We know that Engelhardt studied chemistry at Erlangen University, and that after he graduated, he got a job as a pharmaceutical assistant. And we also know that it was at around this time, right around 1899, 1900, that he became very, very interested in health and in the newly arising lifestyle reform movement. Now, the lifestyle reform movement, or Lebensreform, as it was known in German-speaking areas of the world, was not a single entity or organization. It's an umbrella term to describe all of the various different social reform movements that took place in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Many of these movements tend to be loosely bound together by certain elements that kind of continue across all of them: a disdain for industrialization, a desire to return to nature, a dislike of consumerism and materialism and urbanism. It's those sorts of things that make a movement part of the lifestyle reform or Lebensreform movement. The bloomer movement and the irrational dress movement and vegetarianism, naturopathy, and even the arts and crafts movement led by William Morris all fall under this umbrella of lifestyle reform. I don't know if any of you have seen those videos on YouTube talking about the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, but that's not a new phenomenon, because we do actually see an early version of this with the lifestyle reform movement. Especially in Germany, the Lebensreform movement had this sort of romanticization of returning to folkish traditions, and that really helped to lay the groundwork for Nazi ideologies to take over in the next 40 years. The link can clearly be seen in a 1907 pamphlet published by a reformist and nudist named Richard Ungeweiter. The pamphlet was called Wie der Nacht geworden Menschen, which can be translated roughly as "People become naked again." This pamphlet urged various different practices, one of which was nudism, obviously, Nacht geworden Menschen, that in Ungeweiter's own words would, and I quote, "be the means by which the German race would regenerate itself and ultimately prevail over its neighbors and the diabolical Jews." And as a side note to the side note, it's amazing how many of these conspiracy theories and reform movements and lifestyle, how much of this stuff can be boiled down to, it's the Jews. It's absolutely wild. I hasten to add, not all reformists were proto-Nazis, just like today, not everybody you see going to a health food store is anti-vaccine. And although Engelhardt was very heavily involved in the Lebensreform movement, I've not been able to find a single shred of evidence to suggest that he was involved in the proto-Nazi side of things. In fact, he seems to have been quite the opposite. He spent much of the later part of his life learning traditional healing techniques from indigenous Melanesian people, which is not incredibly Nazi-esque behavior, in my opinion. In 1877, another reformist by the name of Gustav Schlechtjesen published a book called Obst und Brot, ein wissenschaftlich Diätetik, or Fruit and Bread, a Scientific Diet. This book promoted a new lifestyle that was called frugivorianism. That is to say, a diet that consisted primarily of fruit and the occasional nut or seed, but absolutely no animal products. So this is sort of veganism taken to a new extreme, or old extreme. This was 1877. And interestingly, this book also shone a bit of light on a very niche movement that was gaining a small amount of traction called cocovorianism, or a diet composed primarily or exclusively of coconuts. Now, there's no conclusive proof that Engelhardt ever read this book, but given the direction in which his life would later go, it seems to me highly likely that he did. In 1899, Engelhardt took a leap of faith and joined a nudist commune located in the Harz Mountains called the Jungborn Association. And I would just like to say that living in the German Alps without wearing any clothing sounds like a remarkably cold business. While he was a member of this commune, Engelhardt was known to preach in the neighboring towns of Leipzig and Nuremberg about how people would function best by living in a natural state, which is code for being nude, and by eating only coconuts. It's not entirely clear whether or not he was naked when he gave these sermons in town, or whether he put on some kind of covering. It seems likely that he did probably put on some kind of covering for going into town, because nudism was illegal in Germany at this time. I suppose public indecency is also illegal today. I imagine if you were to walk down the streets of Nuremberg wearing nothing but your birthday suit, you'd probably be taken in by the police. But anyhow, that's not what this video is about. The point is that these laws against nudism actually caused some legal trouble for the commune. In addition to the legal problems caused by their nudism, one of the founders of the commune was arrested for improper activities that somehow related to the very legally nebulous naturopathic practice that he had. All of these legal pressures compounded, and they caused the community to collapse at some point between 1900 and 1902. Not one to give up on his coconut-fueled dreams without a fight, after the collapse of the Jungborn, Engelhardt boarded a ship in 1902 bound for German New Guinea, which is a group of islands located in Melanesia. His plan was to start a commune of his own. He pictured this commune as being a paradise on earth where people shunned clothing, worshipped the sun, and ate only coconuts. Now, before we go any further, I think we need to stop for a moment and talk a little bit about Engelhardt's coconut obsession, because I'm sure you must be curious about why this random 19th century German man was so obsessed with the idea that humans should be eating nothing but coconuts. After all, it's not as though coconuts are exactly commonplace in the German Alps. So why did he think this? Well, it began in around 1898, 1899. Engelhardt became convinced that humans should eat one thing and one thing only, and that thing was coconuts. There are several reasons for his coconut-based fanaticism, one of which was the very slim observation that of all fruits, the coconut looks the most like the human head. And because they looked like human heads, they were naturally the perfect fruit for consumption. At around this time, 1898, 1899, although I have not been able to find the exact date, he wrote, and I quote, "We can expect from God that he created our food in the shape of our heads. Coconuts are vegetal human heads, and they alone are the proper human nourishment. Why can we expect that God would create our perfect food in the shape of our own heads? I am unaware." He does not bother to explain that. Engelhardt had another reason for championing the coconut above all other things, though. Around this same time, he also began to develop a philosophy of sun worship. Engelhardt believed that the sun is the most valuable source of life, and that the brain is the most noble of the organs in the human body because of all organs, I suppose aside from the skin on your scalp, it is nearest the sun, which really makes me wonder how he would have felt about standing on your head. He also believed that the brain did not extract its nourishment from the digestive process, which he believed to be vulgar and dirty, which I suppose is fair, but rather that it gathered its nourishment from the roots of the hair, which fed the brain with solar energy that had been gathered from the sun. Basically, he saw hair as being kind of like solar panels. The hair would gather in the solar energy, that energy would be directed to the roots of the hair, which would then direct the energy to the brain. Now, because coconuts grow so high up in the air, that means that they are closer to the sun than any other fruit, which, of course, makes them holy. It was Engelhardt's belief that the consistent consumption of this holy, fuzzy fruit could render people impervious to diseases and even make them immortal. Engelhardt arrived in German New Guinea on October 2nd, 1902, and when he arrived, he purchased a coconut and banana plantation, obviously, from Queen Emma Colby, who is a fascinating figure in her own right. Maybe she'll be a video of her own one day, on the island of Cabacon for 41,000 Deutschmarks. On this plantation, he built a 3-room hut, gave up wearing clothing, and subsisted wholly on coconuts and tropical fruit. That is, until he developed an ulcer on his right leg several months into this experiment. Now, this ulcer was probably caused by malnutrition or by some tropical disease to which he had no immunity, but he blamed the ulcer on the impure tropical fruit that he had been eating naturally. So from that point on, he adopted a coconut monodiet. Nothing but coconuts for Herr Engelhardt. For a few months, Engelhardt lived on the plantation as the only white man out of a population of roughly 40 Melanesians. But as soon as he became a bit more established on Cabicon, he used his rather large inheritance to start publishing promotional materials in Europe for his cult, which he called the Sonnenorden Cabicon, or the Order of the Sun of the island of Cabicon, and also to pay the passage of his new followers to the island. His first followers arrived in 1903. The cult was never very large. It's estimated that at its height, which would have been around 1906, give or take, there were only about 30 people, but it was bizarre enough to garner international attention. On October 5th, 1905, the New York Times published an article about Engelhardt that explained his cult thusly, quote, "His, Engelhardt's, plan was to have his sect worship the sun. He held that man was a tropical animal, not intended to live in caves called houses, but to wander, as Adam did, with the sun beating upon him all day, and the dews of the heaven for a mantle at night. Living such a life, he believed that the healing and curative powers of the sun would render a man so immune that sickness itself could be overcome. Unfortunately, the curative powers of the sun were not strong enough to keep the cult healthy. Many of its members came to sticky ends. Malaria ran rampant, as did fevers from unspecified illnesses, and of course, chronic malnutrition. Whenever one of its members fell ill, Engelhardt would blame the ill person, saying that it must have happened because they had cheated on their coconut-only diet. Must have been eating some evil bananas or something. One would-be cult member was shipwrecked on his way to the plantation and was stranded on a desert island for 2 days before being rescued. But unfortunately, the experience of being stranded proved to be too much for his nervous system, and he died not too long after being rescued. Many of the disciples who managed not to die would end up leaving the cult after being there for only a few months. Interestingly, unlike many cults, members of the Sonnenorden seem to have been able to leave the cult with relative ease, suppose providing they could pay their passage back to Europe, whenever they felt like it. Or were they? Several of the cult members are said to have died under mysterious circumstances. And it just so happens that the ones who died mysteriously had been speaking of leaving the cult and returning to Europe. This has given rise to speculation that Engelhardt either killed these people himself or ordered them to be killed in order to prevent them from leaving. And others have even speculated that these people were sacrificed to the sun. However, there's absolutely no evidence to support any of these wild theories. It seems to me much more likely that these people who shunned medical intervention as one of the core tenets of their beliefs, who were in an unfamiliar climate, being exposed to unfamiliar diseases, who were chronically malnourished, simply succumbed to one of the many illnesses that ravaged the plantation. Speaking of unfamiliar illnesses, in the summer of 1904, Engelhardt himself fell seriously ill. And although for a long time he tried to ride it out at the plantation, at the urging of his followers, he eventually went to the German hospital at the nearby island of Herbertschul. And it was at that hospital that the pernicious effects of the Sonnenorden lifestyle became known. Engelhardt was somewhere between 5'5" and 5'7", yet he weighed only 86 pounds. His skin was covered in ulcers, and he suffered from chronic itching, exhaustion, and lameness. One of the doctors who treated Engelhardt, Dr. Dempwolf, described him as, quote, a paranoid wreck. Engelhardt did eventually recover, and once he did, he escaped from the hospital and returned to the coconut plantation at Cabicon to resume his place as leader of the coconut cult. In around 1906 to 1907, the colonial German government was becoming increasingly suspicious of the Sonnenorden. Upon his return to the plantation from the hospital, Engelhardt tried to have his cult recognized as an official religion. However, the governor of German New Guinea staunchly refused to grant the Sonnenorden official status. And around this time, civil servants were even instructed to warn all potential new cult members that Engelhardt was insane and to do all they could to discourage people from joining the cult. In 1907 to 1908, the decline in the number of cult members really accelerated, and Engelhardt began to sound increasingly unstable and delusional. Around this time, he announced that he planned to start an international colonial empire of frugivorous nudist sun worshippers that would include the entire Pacific, South America, Southeast Asia, and Central Africa. This decline in Engelhardt's mental state was likely brought on by the impending failure of the Sonnenorden, but of course that can't be confirmed. The cult only lasted for about 10 years. By 1913, Engelhardt was the only member, save for potentially one kind of friend and kind of counselor that he had, although he may have been the last member as early as 1909. He did try to recruit more people in 1913, but he was unsuccessful. When World War I broke out, German New Guinea was captured by the Australian army, and in 1915 Engelhardt was imprisoned as a POW in an Australian prison camp at Rabaul. However, he was released after only 3 weeks at the camp when the administrators saw that he was mad but harmless. After his release, Engelhardt returned to what was left of the Sonnenorden plantation at Cabacon, and there he would continue to promote nudism, sun worship, and of course, the excessive consumption of coconuts. Engelhardt was found dead on the beach of Cabacon Island on May 6, 1919. He was in his early 40s, and he weighed only 70 pounds. He was buried in the Inabui Cemetery on the nearby island of Mayoko, although the exact place of his burial is not known or marked. The plantation, which was worthless by this time, was forfeited to the Australian government, along with all of Engelhardt's remaining assets, which totaled a mere £6. Engelhardt left all of his personal effects to one Dr. Berminger of Berlin. He never received them. And thus ends the story of the nudist Victorian sun-worshipping coconut cult. I initially decided to make a video on this story because I thought it sounded funny, and yes, some parts of it were funny. But I did not expect it to make me feel so sad, but it really is a tragic story. When laughing about the silly coconut worshippers, we must remember that Engelhardt and 5 other people, probably many more, died on that island. And they did not die peacefully. They died what were likely very painful and uncomfortable deaths. These were people who wanted nothing more than to be happy and healthy, which is what everybody wants. It was simply their misfortune to put their trust in one as unstable as Engelhardt. I also never expected to have as much sympathy as I do for Engelhardt himself. In spite of the harm that he inflicted upon people, I genuinely believe that he never had anything but good intentions. By all appearances, he sincerely believed what he was preaching. He certainly practiced what he was preaching, and he genuinely believed that he was doing good work in the world. He was certainly not one of those rules for thee but not for me cult leaders about whom one hears. When Engelhardt died as a result of his own teachings, we must not forget that he was a depressed, confused, paranoid, and starving man. Making this video has been a stark reminder to me to always carry compassion in my heart for everybody, even, or especially, characters who, upon first glance, may appear comical or even stupid. This is a reminder that I think we all need from time to time. I also don't think that we're any better today. The internet is full of potential Engelhardts. Every day I hear about some new kind of juice cleanse or fasting regime or fancy new diet that's supposed to cure all ills and make you into a god. While it's true that Engelhardt did take his fad health trend to an extreme seldom seen before or since, I don't think we can be smug or look down upon his followers, as I can very easily see the same thing happening today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I cannot wait to see you again next time. Bye-bye.